Okay, this is chapter 3.2, in which we're going to look at carbohydrates. So, the four major categories of organic molecules that we find in organisms are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. Now, we're going to look at some examples of each one. So let's go to carbohydrates. The name carbohydrate. Hydrate implies water. Okay? Carbo refers to carbon. So, a carbohydrate is a molecule that's composed of only three elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, with a 2-to-1 ratio of the hydrogen and oxygen. That 2-to-1 ratio, of course, that's the same ratio that we have in water, 2 hydrogens to 1 to 1 oxygen. Thus the name hydrate. Now, it is actually not water in the carbohydrate. It just happens to be in the same ratio as water. You don't actually have water molecules. Okay, so some examples down here. We have C6H12O6. Notice 2 hydrogens for 1 oxygen. C12H22O11. So again, just 3 elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, 2-to-1 ratio for the hydrogen and oxygen. The other thing with carbohydrates, if you have a word that ends in ose, sucrose, glucose, maltose, anything ose, that's going to be a carbohydrate. One more characteristic is that carbohydrates are hydrophilic, meaning that they are attracted to water. Hydro, water, philic, loving. Okay, now we can subdivide these carbohydrates into 3 categories based on the size of the molecule. We have monosaccharides, then down here somewhere we have disaccharides, and then polysaccharides. Now, without knowing any more about carbohydrates than those 3 categories, you can ask the question, which is the smallest molecule, mono, di, or polysaccharide? And you ought to pretty quickly come up with the idea, monosaccharide would be the smallest molecule. Mono means 1, di means 2, poly means many. Saccharide is sugar. So, monosaccharide is a molecule composed of 1 ring of sugar. Disaccharide, composed of 2 rings of sugar, and a polysaccharide molecule that is composed of many rings of sugar. Now, these monosaccharides are fairly small as organic molecules go. They can be as small as 3 carbons to as large as 7 carbons. So, for example, 7 carbons, it would be C7H14O7. So, as an organic molecule goes, these monosaccharides are not that large. These monosaccharides serve as the monomers to build polysaccharides. Okay? Now, monosaccharides are polar. Remember, back here we said that they are hydrophilic. They are water-loving. Okay. Monosaccharides are polar. They have polar functional groups, and this is the hydroxyl groups and carbonyl groups. So those both put electrical charges on the molecule, make the molecule interact with water, and thus sugar dissolves in water. Sugar is water soluble. Okay, we've got within this category of monosaccharides, we have these terms triose, pentose, and hexose. 3 carbon, 5 carbon, or 6 carbon sugar. Among common pentose sugars are the ribose sugar, which is the sugar portion that we have for RNA. Notice it's C5H10O5. Okay, that pretty much follows the rules for carbohydrate. Then, with DNA, we have deoxyribose. Okay, deoxy. In other words, it is ribose sugar, but we've lost an oxygen. So C5H10O4. A little bit of a variation from our rules we had a while ago about 2 to 1 ratio in hydrogen to oxygen, but still it's kind of an exception. It's still a carbohydrate. This is the sugar portion of DNA. So ribose, sugar portion of RNA, deoxyribose, sugar portion of DNA. These pentose or 5-carbon sugars are associated with the genetic materials. Okay, monosaccharides, hexose monosaccharides, 6-carbon sugars. The most common is glucose. Glucose is the most common monosaccharide. It's C6H12O6. This is the sugar that is used as an energy source in most cells, not just human, but pretty much across the spectrum of life. And in ourselves, in humans, when a person measures their blood sugar, the person's diabetic, measures blood sugar, they're measuring blood glucose. We maintain a constant 1% glucose in the bloodstream. So this is yet another example of homeostasis. We've got another sugar called fructose. And fructose is an isomer of glucose, meaning that it has the same molecular formula, C6H12O6, but it has a different structure. Now, fructose has a unique characteristic that it is much sweeter than glucose or sucrose. You know, if we stack these up in terms of sweetness, glucose has the least sweet taste to it. Sucrose would be next, and then fructose has this very intense sweet taste. Okay, if you look on the label of any kind of a sweet product, soda, candy, what have you, and a lot of just other products that we don't necessarily think of as being sweet, a lot of manufactured food products, you'll find this phrase, high fructose corn syrup, as one of the ingredients. This high fructose corn syrup comprises about 5% of the U.S. diet. About 5% of the calories that we consume here in the U.S. is high fructose corn syrup. Okay, now this fructose in high fructose corn syrup is exactly the same as naturally occurring fructose that we would have in, well, right here the name implies that it's found in fruits, grapes, apples, peaches, such as that. So this is exactly the same as a naturally occurring fructose. It's not a synthetic material, even though it's made synthetically. The way this is made is cornstarch, which we have in abundance here in the United States and is very cheap here in the United States, is digested down to glucose, which that's not much of a trick. We do that ourselves when we consume any kind of starch. Then the real trick is this glucose is then chemically converted to fructose. Okay. Now, over the past decade or so, this high fructose corn syrup has really been vilified as being a major cause of the obesity problem that we have here in the United States. And it's been probably falsely vilified in this. Because if we look at it, high fructose corn syrup is about 55% fructose, roughly 45% glucose. There's another version of it that switches that around, about 55% glucose, 45% fructose, and they're used in different types of manufactured food products. But sucrose, which is table sugar, this is disaccharide, and it digests down to 1 fructose and 1 glucose. So, when we eat table sugar, we're going to wind up absorbing equal amounts of fructose and glucose from that table sugar. We do roughly the same thing when we consume high fructose corn syrup. So, there's very little difference in the absorbed sugars, whether we're talking about table sugar, sucrose, or high fructose corn syrup. Now here's the sucrose molecule. and it's going to be hydrolyzed in the process of digestion. We're going to insert water, split these two apart, and we'll get one glucose and one fructose molecule. Okay, so this problem with relating sugar to obesity is not a qualitative problem. That is, high fructose corn syrup is not really the villain in this case. It's not the fact that we're consuming this material that is synthetically produced. It's a quantitative problem. It's the amount of these sugars that we are consuming, whether it is high fructose corn syrup or whether it is sucrose table sugar. So, problem is not the consumption of high fructose corn syrup. Problem is the total amount of sugar consumed. Notice in this map, the United States stands out, and this is calories per person per day from sugar, and that is sugars other than sugars that we would have in fruits and other natural sources. So pretty much idea of consuming processed sugar. So you can see in the United States we consume a lot more sugar calories than anywhere else in the world. That is really the nature of this obesity problem that we have. Then we have disaccharides. Di means two, so a disaccharide, this is made up of 2 rings of sugar. And examples of disaccharides are sucrose, which is common everyday table sugar, lactose, which is milk sugar, and maltose, which maltose is intermediate in the digestion of starch. So we digest starch down to maltose, then we digest maltose down to glucose, then we absorb the glucose through the small intestines. Okay, process of digestion is a hydrolytic process. The disaccharide is hydrolyzed down to its monosaccharides. The monosaccharides are what we absorb through the small intestines and into the bloodstream. Okay, which brings us up to polysaccharides, and so we'll stop at this point and pick up with another video. Thank you.